Hey everyone. Today I'm going to talk about chapter 2, which talks about process strategy and process analysis. Okay. Now, for this chapter, there are a couple of things that we're going to be looking at. One is we're going to try and better understand what are process structures within the services industries. Okay. And how do we position any given service process within what's called the customer contact matrix. Okay. Next, I'm going to talk about process structures within manufacturing and the manufacturing industries, and how, again, how do we position any given process on some product process matrix, and I'll go into depth into what that actually means. Okay. Now, there's some decisions that have to be made by the operations manager, whoever it is who's tasked with making these decisions. And as we're going to be talking about this, I want you to keep in mind that whatever decisions make ultimately impacts the ability of the operations to run effectively and overall will result in either a more profitable enterprise or a less profitable enterprise, depending on how well a company structures its operations. Okay, so that's what this chapter is all about. Now, in part 2 of this chapter, we're going to be looking at more of a process reengineer, what's called process reengineering. How do we make our systems more effective, more efficient? Okay. So we're going to be looking at an approach called the DMAIC approach, DMAIC, where we define, we measure, we analyze, we improve and control processes. Okay. And look further into what do companies currently do to try and make their processes even more effective. Okay. So let's start off with our basic definitions. Okay. So process strategy can be defined as a pattern of decisions that are made in managing processes so that they will achieve their competitive priorities. Okay. Different companies have different competitive priorities. And for a company to prosper, to be able to be effective in what it does, it has to fully outline what its competitive priority is. And once it's determined what that competitive priority is, it will then try and align its processes to enable it to best achieve whatever that competitive priority or bunch of competitive priorities are. Okay, so processes are typically just a fundamental building blocks for any organizations, and they typically permeate all different aspects of an organization, right? Could incorporate accounting, could incorporate marketing, human resources, the actual operations of the business, could incorporate research and development, okay? So essentially, the different ways in which we take inputs, whatever our material inputs are, and translate them into some form of an output that has value, either internally or has value to our end customers. Okay. So as we'll be talking about this, and as going to the second part of this, I'll talk about what's called process reengineering, right? Where we radically overhaul how a company looks at how it's been handling a process, and then tries to create a measure of improvement that's quantifiable, okay, and results in a better process flow, okay? And that'll be in our video 2, okay? So as we're going through this first part of the video, the things that I want you to keep in mind is this. There are 3 principles that I want us to look at, that I want us to keep in mind, right? First being that as we're looking at this, I'll be looking at conceptually talking about what's strategic fit. How do we tailor our decisions, our process decisions in a manner that's going to enable the company to achieve whatever its overall business strategy is, okay? Keep in mind that as we're looking at processes, you're typically narrowing it down to a specific process within a much larger organization, and then replicating that over and over for the different processes that a business might have to try and ensure that as we look at the different processes and as we try to improve those processes, that they result in an overall improvement to the entire organization as a whole. Okay. And sometimes this might also include considering what about the entire supply chain, right? Because processes are not typically done in isolation. processes have inputs that come from either some internal supplier, which could be somebody within that organization that puts together certain subcomponents before handing them over to the next person in line. Or it could be an external supplier providing raw materials or providing parts that are needed to go into a given process to be translated into a certain output. Okay, so optimizing this entire supply chain requires us to understand that processes are not done in isolation. They are part of a much larger part of what we call our supply chain. Okay. They also require us to understand the different departments that are a part of what we are doing, right? So there's some cross-functional coordination that you should also take into consideration. What are the different departments that are involved in a given process? What are the different suppliers that are impacted, that are part of this? And what are the customers, both internal and external, that are needed to make a process work? Okay. So keep those in mind. Okay. So some key aspects of process strategy that we'll be delving into is what's the process design? Okay. What's the structural nature of the processes that are needed to convert raw materials into its end goods or delivery of a service if it's a service-based business? Okay. I might want to also know what are the different processes that are available to an organization. Okay, because there are different processes out there. Not all processes work well for a given product or for a given service. Okay, so the person tasked with putting together a given set of processes needs to understand what type of processes are available and what process alternative will work best for the nature of product or service that the organization makes or generates. Okay. And this differs if it's a service-based organization. That would typically, the processes selected would be different from those that would be selected for manufacturing. Okay, but typically within a given industry, a lot of companies will tend to have processes that are similar, right? So if I was looking at the auto industry, for example, the processes used to manufacture vehicles, say at Toyota, might be similar to the processes used to manufacture vehicles at General Motors. Okay, the only difference might be in how effectively they put together those processes and how efficiently they manage the different processes, right? And you'll notice as we go into other chapters, I'll talk a bit about what's called the Toyota production system and what makes Toyota stand out in terms of its processes as well as the way it conducts its business. Okay, so that's something that we'll be looking at. We'll also talk about how do we improve a given process once a process is in place. The global nature of competition is such that a company cannot just sit on its laurels and say that they have a decent process in place. Okay, that's a good start. But typically in a competitive environment, processes have to be evaluated from time to time to ensure that whatever processes are currently in place are top of the line. And to also check to see, is there a way we could actually improve upon what's already available to us? Okay. And another key consideration would be, what about capacity? Your typical organization typically wants to grow sales, right? If you're in manufacturing, you want to be able to sell more product. And to be able to sell more product, you also have to take into consideration, do we have the capacity to be able to sell more? Should the market be such that there's ability for us to sell more? Okay, so capacity planning is something that might be taken into consideration as you're planning your organization's process strategy. Okay. Some other consideration would be, what about the technology that you use? Getting to have the right type of technology makes a big difference. The type of software used, the type of automation used makes a big difference in terms of how much product is made of high quality versus how much is defective. So it becomes something that typically a company wants to be able to invest both time and money in ensuring that the type of technology they use is the best given their capital availability as well as given the needs of the customer. Okay. I will be talking about quality management in greater depth in chapter 3. So I'll skip that. But what I'd like you to know is that quality is a big part of the considerations that go into choosing a given process strategy or given process. Okay. And then there's issues associated with location, how you locate your facilities, typically links to issues related to cost, links to issues related to how fast can you get product to market, or how fast can you get access to your raw materials. Okay. So in a nutshell, if you're thinking of process strategy, I'm going to talk about this graph and one other graph immediately after this. You're typically going to be asking these questions. What type of, do you have a company that has a wide variety of products, or are you a company that has a much narrower variety of products? Okay. Do you typically create a lot of output through your production or your service-based activity, or is it limited in nature? Okay. With regards to technology, again, I might want to know, does the equipment or the automation we have, is it general purpose, meaning that it can be used across multiple product lines, or is it specialized and specific to a given product or service requirement? Okay. Typically, with regards to technology requires a capital input, and we typically want to have the best technology available for the amount of capital that a business have. And typically, the issue of whether it's general purpose or specialized is something that the person tasked with process strategy has to be able to answer. Okay. Now, as we're putting together process strategy, we also have to keep in mind that unless it's a fully automated system, you're going to be having employees. And your employee base will typically be highly skilled if the nature of the product or service requires a high level of skill. Or sometimes it might not be something that requires as much skill, right? So if I had a fast food restaurant, for example, and it had employees that had to make burgers and fries, the skill requirements there are different from a microchip company that manufactures highly sensitive, highly high capacity, what word do I use for this? Highly just as a highly skilled employees to be able to make whatever it is that a microchip company would be able to make. Okay. The last circle that I have here has to do with the production life cycle. Is it production life cycle that's lengthy, or is it shorter in nature? That's something that I might want to know as well as I put together this process strategy. Okay. Now, to summarize all that we've just spoken about, as we're trying to come to figuring out an effective process design, okay, these are the kind of things that I might want to know. Okay, let's start from the top here. Looking at the type of product or service that we're in, I might be interested in knowing how much customer contact we expect to have if we are in the services-based industry, okay? If we are in manufacturing, typically customer service is not a big part of the actual process because your typical end customer only sees the product after it's been completed, after it's been manufactured, okay? So we'll look at the differences in process structure, okay? I might want to know for the given product or service, how much customer involvement is entailed. Okay. How much does the customer contribute to the actual manufacturing of the product or service experience? So that goes into putting together an effective process strategy. Okay. With regards to the flexibility of resources, that kind of ties into whether or not we have general purpose or specialized equipment. Okay. And with capital intensity here, again, we look at how much do we rely on automation versus how much do we rely on actual physical employees, okay? The grayed out box over here talks about the physical layout of the plant or location where this process is going to be enacted, Okay, and the different ways in which a company can actually lay out its facility. And even though I'm not going to be talking about this, if you go into the course textbook, I believe it's supplement K, we have a whole section that looks at what are the different ways in which a facility can be laid out to better manage or better enable a process strategy. Okay. Now, in addition to that, the box we have in green here refers to our continued effort to try and improve the processes that have already been put in place. Okay, so in the second video that I'll post, we'll go into a discussion of process reengineering and process improvement. How do we go about as a business making our processes better than they are today? What are the different techniques that are typically used, and how would a business go about reengineering a process that's already in place and has been in place for a couple of months or years? Okay, so that's that. All right, so let's move on to a discussion of process structure within companies that are considered as being within the services industries. Okay, and typically when you think of your typical service-based industry, if you look at a company, say for example a McDonald's, there's typically going to be some kind of interaction between the customer and the manufacturer of that service, right? So the people making that food typically will have some interaction with the customer, okay? Another example would be a dentist's office, okay? Your typical customer at a dentist office interacts directly with the provider of that service, which would be the dentist or some dental assistant or a receptionist, okay? And typically, if you're looking at process structure in the services, it's typically a good first step to understand what are the type of customers we're dealing with, what type of customer contact do we expect to have. Is it going to be high contact, where we interact with the customer a lot, or is it going to be considered low contact? Okay, so that's something that we typically want to know. Okay, the amount of physical presence of the customer. Okay, with regards to what we are processing, you're typically either going to be processing people in a high contact environment where people show up, they have a specific need. For example, a McDonald's customer wants food, right? So we're going to be processing their specific needs, okay? And that's different from a situation where we have low contact, okay? An example of low contact that I could give would be a situation where we have a call center. And with a call center, you typically never ever really get to see who's on the other side of the call if you call into that call center, right? But you have a specific issue that you want to have addressed, and you're typically going to be trying to process information about something that you purchased from that given organization. Okay, so it would be potentially you have an issue with a product you purchased from, say, Amazon, and you're now trying to provide information back and forth on how to try and resolve an issue that you have with that. Okay. Obviously, with such a low contact environment, it's a bit more impersonal. You don't get to know who's on the other side of the phone. You don't know where they are physically, whether they're local to the US or in some other nation. Okay, that differs a lot from a situation where you're at a fast food restaurant ordering product in person. Okay, and you'll notice too that because of that, with high contact environments, aesthetics plays a big role. You want your customer to arrive at a location, and the location should have a measure of appeal to the customer, right? Which is very different from a situation where there's low contact. For example, a call center, most customers don't even know the nature of the call center. There's no need to spend more on the physical, the aesthetical appeal of the location that you would be having. Okay, so that's something that would go into figuring out how do we set up the processes associated with a given service. Okay, now let's talk about the customer contact matrix. This is part of, if you go back to the very beginning of what I talked about, okay? You might want to try and figure out for a given process, where does it fall along the customer contact matrix? So this is a customer contact matrix, okay? And typically with the services, a product is either going to be positioned, a process is going to be positioned either as a front office process, a hybrid process, or a back office process, okay? Your typical front office is aligned to a high contact environment, okay? And you notice with this is that you have, when you look at the characteristics with this, you have a high level of interaction with the customer. There's a lot of differentiation in terms of what the customers want. So you have to be able to address each and every customer's wants individually, okay? With regards to process divergence, okay? Here, you find there's typically going to be very flexible flows, and each customer experience is very individualized, okay? That differs from what we have as our back office process, okay? And your typical back office process, if you go back to what I mentioned with the call center, you'll find that with regards to customer contact, there's very low interaction, low physical interaction with the customer, okay? And typically, the types of things that are processed typically would be more standardized. Customers will typically call in with very specific type of issues to a back office. And you could almost say that an office might have canned responses such that for a given type of query, the customer service rep will have a specific approach to trying to resolve whatever issue the customer has, okay? So there's a lot of duplication of the offering with the back office, where you have standard responses that are expected, and with just a few little tweaks to try and customize it to whatever it is that the customer called about, okay? Now, in between these is what's called a hybrid office. And the hybrid office takes certain elements of the front office and certain elements of the back office, okay? So for example, there'll be a measure of interaction between the customer and the people who are handling the process, okay? Slightly more than for a back office, but slightly less than a front office, okay? And at the same time, you'll find when you look at the process divergence, there'll be flexible flows with some dominant paths, okay? So hybrid offices typically balance some moderate contact with standardized services, right? So there's contact, yes, but they also give standardized responses to those people asking for some kind of a service, okay? So that is your typical type of structure that you'd find in the services. Now, moving on to manufacturing, we have slightly different process structures, okay? And the process choices here are limited to any one of these four that we have on this here page, okay? I'm going to talk about what's a job process, what's a batch process, what's a line process, and what's this continuous flow process, okay? Now, let's start off before we go here. Let's look at the product process matrix. Okay, let's look at this here. Okay, so the product process matrix is, I would call it a critical or a crucial tool for trying to determine what's the optimal structure for a manufacturing operation, right? What type of process should I use if this is the type of product that I want to make, okay? If I was a mechanic and wanted to set up a mechanics shop, should I use a job process? Should I use a batch process? Should I use a line process or a continuous flow process? Okay. One of these four approaches makes the most sense depending on the nature of the product that I want to make. Okay. So to be able to determine what process structure makes the most sense for the product that a company makes, I might want to know a couple of things. I might want to know what's the volume typically that needs to be manufactured on a daily basis. Okay, it's either going to be a whole bunch of product that needs to be made, or maybe quite a few products that needs to be made on any given day. So that's something that I might want to know. What's the volume that I might want to know? Something else that I might want to know is how much customization do I need to have for each and every product? Okay. If I was a manufacturer of cereal and all I was making was, say, oatmeal, right? Each and every customer getting that oatmeal typically will have the exact same type of oatmeal. Okay, and it could be possible that I have one or two different variations, but typically customization of that product is typically something that I wouldn't really be interested in, right? But if I had a mechanics shop that was dealing with cars coming in that had different types of damage, and I had, let's say, an auto repair shop, every single product coming into that shop will be different. Okay. And every single experience will have to be customized to the specific needs of that customer. Okay. And the last thing that I might want to think about would be, what about the process characteristics? What's the way in which the manufacturing process itself is designed, and how does it function? Okay. So let's look at these four processes here. Let's start with the job process. Okay. The job process would be, again, if you consider an auto body shop, every single piece of business that comes in is very individualized. Every single customer has a different need from the next. Okay. And you typically would find that for an auto body shop, the volume that comes in or that can be processed on any given day is very low. Okay. We can't handle 1,000 cars every day at a body shop. Typically would be maybe 3, 5, 10 different vehicles on any given day. Okay. So your typical job process is characterized as having low volume. Okay. And it's typically made to or tailored to whatever the customer wants. Okay. And this is typically ideal for what you call high product, low volume types of product. Okay. Some other example I would give here would be if somebody had a specialty furniture store, high-end specialty furniture store, where every customer came in, sat down, and kind of like discussed what type of furniture they wanted and are willing to pay a high price for that. That might fall under job process, because every single customer's need is different. Every single customer gets specialized, individualized attention. And if you look here on the amount of divergence, you'd find that we tend to have customized processes in place, okay, which are typically going to be very flexible to the specific needs of each and every customer. Okay. Now, the second type of process structure that we might have are what are called batch processes. Okay. Now, batch processes are typically suitable in situations where you have much higher volume, right? And your production typically occurs in batches, right? So often we try and group similar customer orders together and then have a production run, make maybe 1,000 parts, stop that batch, make another 1,000 batches of a different customer order, and so on and so forth. Okay. So you typically could have either what's called a small batch process or a large batch process, depending on how much you typically make per production run. Okay. Now, for these here, one thing that you could, if you look at the amount of customization and volume, the information description here in this matrix here is that you could have multiple products, right? And the amount of volume could either be low, where we might run into using a small batch process, or it could be moderate, okay, where you do a larger batch process, okay? And if you look at amount of divergence and line flows here, we typically have what's called a disconnected line flow, okay? We make stuff, we've run a production batch, stop, make another batch, stop, make another batch. So there's a lot of repetition. where the production line is ran, stopped maybe for maintenance, and then set up for the next run. Okay, could even be set up to make different types of products. Okay, and then we have what's called a line process. And a line process here would be similar to what we have with an assembly line, right? If you can conceptualize an assembly line where you have multiple people putting together different parts along an assembly line, that's what we would call a line process, okay? So this is typically efficient for high volume production where you have a standardized product with very, very little deviation, okay? So the amount of divergence on product is very little, okay? The amount of volume that's created is typically going to be pretty high, okay? And this is typically good with different commodities. Like if, for example, if we're making cereal, or if you're making vehicles, that's something that you might want to use an assembly line kind of situation. Okay, so typically for a line process, you have dedicated resources that are specifically used to make a different component, and they're typically going to be arranged in some sequential order where you'd be continuously in and out day by day, repeating some manufacturing flow. Okay. And the last type of process structure that we have here are what's called the continuous flow process. Okay. Here, this typically is kind of like an extreme end of some high volume production where you're typically going to have very rigid linear flow. Okay. And typically this is an assembly line, if I could call it an assembly line, even though it's not an assembly line, but it's typically going to be used in situations where you have a product which can be manufactured continuously without having to stop production, okay? And the two examples that I give here is, say, for example, the manufacture of petroleum or of natural gas, right? If you look at a petroleum manufacturing facility, that plant continuously flows, okay? And think about continuous flow and the movement of a fluid, okay? It's continuously being made. There's no stopping and starting and stopping and starting, okay? So typically here with continuous flow processes, what we expect to have in terms of customization and volume is that there's going to be high volume, okay? The product is highly standardized. It's going to be a specific commodity, right? Most continuous flow processes are linked to a specific commodity like petroleum, like natural gas, and the production process is continuously flowing, okay? So these are the four different types of process structures that you typically would find in manufacturing, okay? Now, what about strategies that are used in actual production versus in terms of inventory, okay? So we have four different types of strategies here. A design to order strategy is typically used in situations where you have, say, for example, a job process, because you have to sit down with the job owner and figure out what exactly does this customer want. And once you've gotten all these different specifications of what the customer wants, then you could go about the process of costing, you could go about the process of figuring out how to put together whatever it is that that customer wants and deliver to that customer within a given time period, okay? An example I would give here would be consider the manufacturer of a customized home, right? If I wanted to build a home in Savannah and I had certain specifications, I didn't want a cookie cutter home, I wanted something tailored exactly to what I want, I would sit down with an architect and possibly a building contractor, tell them what I need to have in that home in terms of the number of bedrooms, the number of living rooms, the number of bathrooms, what I want to see in the kitchen, what I want to see in the bathrooms. And once all that's done, then they'd go ahead and put that all together and deliver to me the type of house that I would want. Okay. Now that differs from the second strategy here, which is a make-to-order strategy. Okay. With a make-to-order strategy, you typically have a commodity that does not require an individualized attention, right? For example, if I was making cereal and I was selling this to different retailers like Sam's Club and Costco, they will buy the product that I'm selling in the format or in the form that I make it, right? So they place an order with the company. We make the product once that order is received. So what triggers that production is the receipt of a purchase order. Okay, so it could be possibly maybe a purchase requisition that leads to a purchase order. But once that purchase order is received, that triggers the manufacturing process. Okay, so typically for make-to-order strategies, we're not holding on to stock. We're making product based off of what our customers have actually ordered. Okay, now a variant to that would be an assemble-to-order strategy. And with assemble-to-order strategy, the company typically already has the different subcomponents, sub-assemblies already in place. They only wait for an order to be received to be the trigger to having all those different sub-assemblies or subcomponents put together to be able to meet whatever is on that purchase order. Okay. Now, with an assemble-to-order strategy, sometimes companies use a system of postponement. And the postponement strategy talked about here has to do with having components already ready and only waiting until the very last moment to add a final component that's specific to the need of the customer at that very last moment. Okay. Now, an example I'd give of this would be, what if I wanted to sell T-shirts at the Super Bowl? Okay. And I did not know which team is going to win, right? So there are two teams, there's team A and team B. They have an equal likelihood of winning the Super Bowl. And I'd want to start selling T-shirts as soon as I know who that Super Bowl winner is. Okay. So I would have the option of possibly, if I was to sell 10,000 T-shirts, I could possibly sell 5,000 of those. I could produce 5,000 of those with the Team A logo and with the wording winner, and have the exact same thing for Team B and say winner. Problem with that is half of my stock might not be sold because it's going to have the wrong information on it. Okay. Now, the postponement concept here says, what if instead of doing that, we do everything that has to be done on that T-shirt, right? Put all the different all the different wording that needs to be done. The only thing that we postpone doing is the putting of the name of the team that actually wins, right? That one last part could possibly be done right at the end of Super Bowl. At the end of Super Bowl, we find out Team A wins. We immediately put into production that logo, Team A winner, Super Bowl 2024, 2025, whatever year it is. So that's the concept of postponement. It enables you to tailor your products to what the customer wants at the very last part of the assembly of the manufacturing process. Okay. Now, a lot of companies would engage in this last strategy that we have here called make to stock. And that is a situation where the company makes product without having an actual fixed order from the customer. Okay. Now, this is typically done in situations where you have a commodity that typically sells quite well, and you know that customers will come to purchase this. So you want to stock up and have product available to the customer whenever it is that they'll come and shop for the product that they want. Okay. So this is where you have typical warehousing kicks in, and you want to be able to put in your warehouses or distribution centers product and have them ready whenever the customer wants to have product made available to them. Okay. So these are the four strategies that typically, as we're looking at a process strategy, I might want to know what's the type of customer and what type of orders do we expect to receive? Are they something that we sit down with the customer? Is it something that's made to order or assembled to order? Are we just going to make product and have it sit in a warehouse or waiting production? Okay. Now, a couple more things that I'll talk about here. I'll let you possibly read the textbook about layouts and what goes into the layout of the physical facility that a business would have. Okay, but I also want you to read up on customer involvement in the process strategy decision. Okay, read up on resource flexibility. I hinted about this when we talked about the second graph in today's discussion, and also about capital intensity. Okay. Now, the last thing I'll talk about and then end this video has to do with how do we link your competitive priority to the process choice? Okay. Remember, competitive priorities differ from company to company and from industry to industry. Okay. Now, depending on the nature of the company's competitive priority, there are specific process choices that make the most sense. Okay. Now, let's look at the first one here. Companies that focus on top quality, okay, or on-time delivery, or on being flexible, flexible to the needs of the customer, typically would focus on a job process. I want to use the example of a watch manufacturer. Let's look at, say, what's the top watch manufacturing company? Say Seiko or a Timex, right? Your typical watch manufacturer who sells high quality watches typically wants to make them tailored to what the customers expect of that specific brand, right? So for a company like Timex, if it has a watch that it sells for $25,000, their focus would be on top quality. Okay, they would typically use a job process where each and every timepiece manufactured is customized to the need of its customer. Okay, now that might differ from a company that uses a large batch flow. Okay, and typically these might be companies that have a competitive priority of low cost of operations or consistent quality or delivery speed. Okay. Now, if we look at some more here, let's look at the link between process choice and competitive priority. Sorry, the link between the production and inventory strategy and competitive priority. Again, this takes us back to what we had here. Okay. If I look at each and every one of these four strategies here, what competitive priority makes the most sense for each and every one of these? Okay. Design to order is typically going to be linked to situations where you want a custom product, where the person who's buying the product from the company seeks high quality, seeks variety from the norm, and typically are willing to pay a premium for that. Okay. Make to order strategies are typically linked again to top quality, on-time delivery, flexibility. Okay. Because for most make to order, your person placing the order wants to know, when will you deliver this to me, because I might be using it within my own production process. Okay. With assemble to order, again, one of the keys to assemble to order is that the subcomponents are already there. And because of that, it's very easy to just go ahead and put those subcomponents together and have a finished product in a very short period of time. Okay. So that makes it easy for a company to have a high delivery speed and to have very many different combinations in ways in which they can put that product together. Okay. And finally, for the make to stock, we're typically going to be looking at a situation where we have low cost operations and pretty high levels of delivery speed. Okay. So yeah, this is what I want to cover in chapter 2, part 1. And we're going to move on to chapter 2, part 2 in the next video. And I'm going to go over process reengineering. How do we make our processes even better than they are at present? Okay. Thank you.